The signature was worth more than the gross domestic product of a small nation. In the cutthroat arena of Silicon Valley, where innovation was both currency and creed, a single line of ink could birth a technological dynasty or condemn it to the digital graveyard. At the center of the storm sat Julian Croft, a man whose net worth was calculated in the billions and whose ambition was measured in galaxies. He was the apex predator of the tech world, the architect of an empire built on code and conquest. Everyone in the rarefied air of Aura, San Francisco's most unobtainable restaurant, believed he was about to make another killing. But that night, beneath the panoramic view of the Golden Gate Bridge, Julian Croft was not the hunter. He was the prey, seconds from walking into a gilded cage meticulously constructed by his oldest rival. His legal team, paid a king's ransom per hour, saw only victory. They were blind to the poison woven into the fine print. But the girl, the one who moved like a phantom refilling his Pellegrino, saw it all. She was a ghost in a black uniform, invisible and inconsequential. But when she found the courage to speak, her whisper was a seismic event, powerful enough to halt the relentless march of progress itself. This is the story of how a forgotten girl saved an emperor, and how the emperor learned that while data is powerful, truth is absolute. The fog rolled in from the bay, pressing against the vast, soundproof windows of Aura, as if trying to muffle the conversations of the gods within. The air inside was a carefully curated blend of seared Wagyu, vintage Bordeaux, and the low humming electricity of immense wealth. Clara Vance moved through it all with practiced invisibility. At 22, her eyes were the color of the stormy Pacific, and a weariness had settled deep into her bones, a weight far heavier than the silver tray she carried. For 2 years, she had perfected the art of being background noise. She was the silent hand that refilled a glass, the swift presence that cleared a plate. To the titans of industry who dined here, she was less than human. She was a function, a part of the seamless service they paid for. And she preferred it that way. Anonymity was a shield. It meant no one would ever connect her to the spectacular downfall of her father, a brilliant engineer whose name was now synonymous with failure and disgrace. No one would ask why a girl who could dismantle a microprocessor in her mind was clearing crumbs for a living. "Table 7 is yours, Vance," grunted Mr. Dubois, the maître d', his French accent a thin veneer over a Bronx growl. "Don't breathe on them. It's Julian Croft." Clara's stomach clenched. Julian Croft, the founder of Nexus Dynamics. At 34, he was a legend, a ruthless visionary who had revolutionized data processing. He was rumored to trust algorithms more than people, and to have ice water where his heart should be. Tonight, he was closing the deal of the decade, the acquisition of Kronos Innovations, a rival firm on the brink of a breakthrough in quantum computing. Carrying a chilled bottle of Pellegrino, Clara approached the table. 4 men sat in the custom leather chairs. 3 were silver-haired lawyers, their suits so perfectly tailored they seemed inorganic. The 4th was Julian Croft. He sat with his back to the city, the lights of the bridge forming a scattered electric crown behind his dark hair. He wasn't smiling. His intense grey eyes were fixed on the man seated opposite him, Alistair Finch. "The terms are more than generous, Julian," Alistair was saying, his voice a smooth, cultured purr that Clara instinctively distrusted. He was older, with a patrician air and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "My board is anxious. We need to finalize this before the Tokyo market opens." "Your board is always anxious, Alistair," Julian replied, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "I've seen the executive summary. It looks clean." "It is clean," Alistair insisted, gesturing to the thick, leather-bound contract on the table. A simple intellectual property transfer. You get the Chronos quantum algorithm, the key to unlocking true AI. I get the capital to pursue quieter ventures. Everyone wins. Clara moved with the silence of a cat, beginning her circuit of the table. She poured for Alistair, then his two lawyers, who looked like vultures waiting for a feast. Finally, she came to stand at Julian Croft's right shoulder. The contract lay open, its pages filled with dense, single-spaced text designed to numb the mind. As she leaned forward to pour the water, her gaze fell upon the page. She tried to pull her eyes away. It was not her place. She was a waitress. She was nothing. But a specific phrase, a string of technical jargon, snagged her attention like a fishhook. All liabilities, extant and contingent, arising from the core Helios encryption protocol, including any and all third-party challenges to patent primacy under the Leahy-Smith America Invents Act. Her heart began to pound, a frantic, suffocating rhythm against her ribs. Helios. She knew that name. She knew that protocol. It was a ghost from another life, a name whispered with reverence and then sorrow in her childhood home. It was the name of her father's masterpiece, the revolutionary encryption he had designed before Alistair Finch, his then partner, had stolen it, bankrupted him, and left him a broken man. Clara froze, the water bottle suspended in her hand. The clause wasn't standard legal boilerplate. It was a time bomb. Alistair wasn't just selling the algorithm. He was offloading the impending, cataclysmic lawsuit that came with it. A lawsuit that Clara knew was coming, because the true patent holder, a shell corporation her father had established years ago, was now hers. Miss, Julian Croft's voice sliced through her paralysis. He wasn't looking at the contract. He was looking at her. His gaze was sharp, analytical, and currently laced with irritation. My glass. Clara blinked, her mind snapping back to the present. The water. My apologies, sir. She poured, her hand shaking so violently that a few drops splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. She had to walk away. She needed this job. Her mother's mounting medical bills depended on it. If she said a word, she'd be fired instantly. Worse, she would be revealing herself, inviting the scrutiny of the very man who had destroyed her family. Alistair would recognize her name. He would finish what he started. Alistair Finch slid a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen across the table. Sign, Julian. Let's make history. Julian picked up the pen. The polished nib hovered over the signature line, a gleaming black dagger poised to strike. Walk away, Clara. Just turn around and walk away. But then she saw it, a flicker of a smirk on Alistair's face. It was a fleeting, triumphant twitch of the lips, the look of a chess master who had just cornered the king. She saw her father's face, pale and defeated. She heard her mother's quiet sobs at night. She couldn't do it. She couldn't stand by and watch another good man be devoured by that shark. "Excuse me," Clara said. Her voice was barely a whisper, thin and reedy. But in the charged silence of that table, it landed with the force of a thunderclap. Julian's hand stopped. The pen's tip rested on the paper, leaving a tiny black dot like a period at the end of a sentence. He turned his head, his grey eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" Mr. Dubois was already materializing from the shadows, his face a mask of pure terror. "Mr. Croft, my deepest apologies. She is new. She is—" "Quiet," Julian commanded, his voice soft but absolute. He never took his eyes off Clara. "You said something." Clara clutched the empty water bottle to her chest like a shield. Her entire future was balanced on the head of a pin. I said, Excuse me, sir. And? Julian prompted, his expression unreadable, a blank slate of dangerous curiosity. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked at the contract, then at Alistair Finch, whose affable mask had frozen into a rictus of disbelief and fury. That clause, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength as she pointed a trembling finger at the document. Section 9, paragraph B. It's a trap. The silence that descended was so profound she could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. Then Alistair Finch erupted in a harsh, barking laugh. A trap? Julian, are you seriously going to listen to legal analysis from the hired help? This is utterly preposterous. Dubois, get this woman out of my sight. Mr. Dubois seized Clara's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep like talons. You're fired, Vance. Out! Now! Let her go. Julian's voice didn't rise, but it carried an authority that made Dubois' hand fall away, as if he'd touched a live wire. Julian capped the pen and set it down deliberately. He turned his chair to face Clara fully, a predator studying a strange new creature that had wandered into his territory. Explain, he said. Why is it a trap? Clara pulled her arm back, straightening her spine. The terror was a cold knot in her stomach, but a different feeling was rising to meet it, the righteous fury she had suppressed for years. The clause about the Helios Protocol, she said, her voice steadier now. It's a specific indemnity transfer. You're not just acquiring the asset. You're assuming absolute liability for any pre-existing patent challenges. Alistair's face was losing its colour. This is nonsense. She's babbling. There is a dormant shell corporation, registered in Delaware, that holds the original patent for the Helios core logic, Clara continued, her words coming faster, the knowledge she had buried for years bubbling to the surface. That patent predates yours by 18 months. The moment this deal is announced, that corporation will file an injunction and a lawsuit for damages that will run into the tens of billions. You won't just lose your investment. Your entire Nexus network, which will be integrated with the new tech, will be frozen by court order. The clause is designed to make you the sole target, while Mr. Finch walks away with your cash. Julian stared at her, his face a granite mask. Then he reached for the contract, flipping back to the section she had indicated. He was a brilliant man, but he was a technologist, not a patent attorney. The legalese was designed to be opaque. He found the lines she mentioned. He read them once, then a second time. Slowly, a dangerous stillness settled over him. The air at the table grew frigid. He looked up, not at Clara, but at Alistair. The polite facade was gone. The predator was awake, and it had scented blood. Alistair, Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. What is Vance Innovations, LLC? Alistair was now openly sweating. It's nothing. A defunct entity, a paper trail from the early days. Julian, listen to me. This girl is... She's right, Julian said, his eyes scanning the page with terrifying speed now that he knew what to look for. The definition of third-party challenges is intentionally broad, and the liability is uncapped. This isn't an acquisition. It's a corporate suicide pact. You were going to let me walk into a kill box. Julian closed the folder with a soft, final thud. He turned his gaze back to Clara, really looking at her for the first time. He saw the worn-out shoes, the cheap uniform, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the fierce, defiant intelligence that burned there like a pilot light. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm just a waitress," Clara whispered, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Julian turned back to Alistair. "Get out." "Julian, we can discuss this." "Get out." He didn't raise his voice, but the menace contained in those two words made Alistair flinch as if struck. "And tell your lawyers that if I ever discover they were complicit in this attempted fraud, I won't just have them disbarred. I will personally finance their every competitor until they're begging for work on street corners." Alistair Finch scrambled to his feet, his chair clattering backward. He shot Clara a look of pure, venomous hatred. "You foolish little girl," he hissed. "You have no idea what you've just done." He stormed away, his legal team scurrying in his wake like hyenas abandoning a failed hunt. The entire restaurant was silent, every eye fixed on their table. Julian Croft picked up his water glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. He looked at Mr. Dubois, who was trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "She's gone, Mr. Croft. I assure you, her employment is terminated," Dubois stammered. "If you fire her," Julian said calmly, "I will buy this building by tomorrow afternoon. I will terminate your lease by evening, and by the end of the week, I will personally oversee its demolition. This view is wasted on a restaurant." Dubois' mouth worked silently, like a fish gasping for air. "I understand completely, sir." Julian gestured to the empty chair across from him, the one Alistair had just fled. "Sit," he said to Clara. "Sir, I have other tables to clear." "Sit," he repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Please." Clara hesitated, then perched gingerly on the edge of the plush velvet chair. She felt like a stray dog in a palace. "You're not a waitress," Julian stated. It wasn't a question. Waitresses don't understand the America Invents Act. They don't spot indemnity traps hidden in a 100-page document that they're reading upside down. "I read a lot," she deflected weakly. "Don't lie to me," Julian said, his gaze sharpening. "You just saved me from the biggest financial disaster of my life. The price of that information is your name." "My name is Clara," she said. "Clara Vance." Julian's brow furrowed. He tilted his head, a flicker of something, recognition, memory, in his eyes. "Vance? Why is that name familiar?" Clara's blood ran cold. He couldn't make the connection. Not here. Not now. "It's a common name," she said, her voice tight. "Mr. Croft, I appreciate you saving my job, but I really should get back to work. I need this job. My mother—" Julian studied her, seeing the flicker of desperation she was trying so hard to conceal. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a minimalist black business card made of metal. He slid it across the table. "My office, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, he said. "I can't," Clara said automatically. "I have the breakfast shift." "No, you don't," Julian replied. "You work for me now." "Doing what?" "My entire legal department, a team of the most expensive lawyers on the West Coast, missed that clause," Julian said, his voice laced with cold fury. "You spotted it while pouring water. You're going to tell me exactly how." "I don't have a degree," Clara blurted out, the old shame stinging her. "I don't care about degrees," Julian said, rising from his chair. He adjusted his jacket. "I care about data, and I care about patterns. You are an anomaly, Miss Vance, and I always investigate anomalies." He paused, his grey eyes locking onto hers. 8 a.m. Don't make me send someone to find you." He turned and strode out of the restaurant, leaving Clara alone at the table, clutching a cold metal card that felt heavier than a bar of gold, with a secret that could either save her or get her killed. The lobby of Nexus Dynamics headquarters was less a building and more a monument to the future. It was a cavernous space of brushed steel, smart glass, and holographic displays that shifted with silent, flowing data streams. Clara stood in the center of it all, feeling small and anachronistic in her best and only blouse and slacks an outfit she'd bought for a community college interview 3 years ago, before her world had imploded. She had barely slept, her mind a maelstrom of fear and a desperate, unfamiliar flicker of hope. This was a mistake. She should have run. Alistair Finch was not a man who forgave. If he discovered who she was, he would crush her and her mother without a second thought. But Julian Croft was not a man you said no to. The metal card in her pocket felt like a summons she couldn't ignore. Clara Vance? A crisp, efficient voice broke her reverie. A woman with a severe haircut and a tablet computer looked at her expectantly. "I'm Evelyn, Mr. Croft's executive assistant. He's waiting for you. This way." Clara followed her into a private elevator that moved with unnerving speed and silence. "Mr. Croft's office is on the top floor," Evelyn said, not looking at her. "It's a secure level. Biometric access only. You've been granted temporary clearance." The doors opened directly into a vast, minimalist office that seemed to float above the city. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass. The 4th was a massive, interactive data wall. Julian Croft stood before it, not in a suit, but in a simple grey t-shirt and dark jeans. He didn't turn around. "The Leahy Smith America Invents Act," Julian said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. It shifted the US patent system from a first-to-invent to a first-to-file system, a subtle but crucial distinction. "You mentioned it by name." "A waitress." "I told you, I read," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You did more than read." Julian turned, his grey eyes pinning her in place. "You knew the specific legal vulnerability of the Helios Protocol. That isn't public knowledge. That's insider information. So I'm going to ask you again. And this time I expect the truth. Who are you? And how do you know about my deal with Alistair Finch?" He wasn't offering her a job. He was interrogating her. The initial gratitude she'd felt was replaced by a chilling realization. He didn't see a savior. He saw a threat, a variable he couldn't account for. "My father was an engineer," Clara began, her voice cracking slightly. "His name was Marcus Vance. He and Alistair Finch were partners years ago. They started a company together." Julian's expression remained impassive, but a flicker of interest ignited in his eyes. He gestured to one of the 2 stark white chairs facing his desk. "Sit." Clara sat. Julian remained standing, a deliberate power dynamic she understood all too well. "My father designed the core architecture for what Alistair later rebranded as the Helios Protocol," she explained, the words tasting like rust. "He poured his life into it. Alistair handled the business side. One day, Alistair came to him with papers, saying they needed to form a new parent company for tax purposes. My father trusted him. He signed everything." She paused, the memory still raw. The papers weren't for a new company. They were a transfer of all intellectual property rights directly to Alistair. A week later, Alistair dissolved their partnership, locked my father out of the lab, and took everything. He used a loophole in their operating agreement, a clause my father never understood. We tried to fight it. We spent every penny we had on lawyers. But Alistair buried us in legal fees. We lost our house. My father, he lost his will. He died of a heart attack 2 years later. The doctors said it was stress. The office was silent, save for the faint hum of the servers. "Vance Innovations LLC," Julian said softly, the pieces clicking into place. "That was his holding company, the one that still holds the original patent." "He filed it before Alistair betrayed him," Clara confirmed. "It was his only protection, but we could never afford to use it, to challenge a monster like Kronos in court. It just sat there, dormant, a ghost, Julian walked to his desk and tapped a few commands into its sleek, integrated surface. A holographic file appeared in the air between them. It was a deep background check on her. Clara Vance. Dropped out of Stanford's engineering program. A string of low-wage jobs. A mother with chronic kidney failure. Mountains of medical debt. Everything was there. "You didn't just happen to be in the restaurant," Julian stated, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You knew I was meeting Alistair. You orchestrated this." Clara flinched. "No, I swear. I work double shifts at Aura. It was just my table. When I heard the name Helios, I couldn't stay silent." Julian studied her, his mind running 1,000 simulations. Was she telling the truth? Was she a pawn in a more complex game? Or was she exactly what she appeared to be? The one person on Earth with the knowledge to see Alistair's trap. "You have the patent," Julian said. "You could have let the deal go through, then sued me and become a billionaire yourself. Why warn me?" "Because my father wasn't a predator," Clara said, her voice ringing with conviction. "He was a builder. He wanted his technology to change the world, not to be a weapon in some corporate blood feud. Using his legacy to destroy your company would make me no better than Alistair. I want justice, Mr. Croft, not revenge." For the first time, Julian's expression softened, just a fraction. He saw the fire in her eyes, the fierce integrity that had cost her everything. He was a man who dealt in absolutes, in binary code, in zeros and ones. Her logic was compelling. It was also unprofitable, which made it strangely trustworthy. He deactivated the hologram. "Alistair won't let this go," he said. "Last night, you cost him $1 billion payday and publicly humiliated him. He already knows you were the source. He will come after you. He will try to acquire your father's patent by any means necessary to cover his tracks." A cold dread washed over Clara. "What do I do?" "Ordinarily, I would pay you a handsome finder's fee for the information and wish you luck," Julian said, walking to the window and looking out over the city. "But this is no longer just about a bad deal. Alistair tried to cripple my company. He declared war. And you, Miss Vance, are now in possession of the one weapon that can guarantee my victory." He turned back to her. "I'm not offering you a job as a consultant. I'm offering you an alliance. You give Nexus Dynamics exclusive right to litigate on behalf of Vance Innovations. My legal team will become your legal team. We will sue Alistair Finch into oblivion. We will restore your father's name and reclaim his legacy. And when we win, you will receive a settlement that will make you one of the wealthiest women in this city." Clara was speechless. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Justice, vindication, security for her mother. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Your knowledge," Julian said. "Alistair built his entire company on your father's work. You grew up with it. You understand it in a way my engineers never could. I need you to help my team dismantle Kronos from the inside out. You will work here, at my side, until this is over." He paused. "And I need your absolute loyalty. No secrets, no holding back. From this moment on, you work for me. Are we clear?" It was a deal with the devil, or an angel. She couldn't tell which. But as she looked at the powerful, enigmatic man before her, she knew she had no other choice. Her old life was over. The ghost had been seen. "Clear," she said. The next few weeks were a dizzying immersion into a world Clara had only ever dreamed of. She was given an office adjacent to Julian's, a stark, white space she slowly populated with her father's old schematics and notebooks, which she'd kept hidden in a storage unit. Julian had her mother moved to a private, state-of-the-art medical facility under a new name, with the best doctors money could buy. For the first time in years, Clara could breathe. But the work was relentless. She spent 18-hour days with Julian and his core team, a group of elite engineers and lawyers who initially viewed her with suspicion. But her insights were undeniable. She could look at a line of Kronos code and see the ghost of her father's original design. She could anticipate Alistair's strategies because she knew the foundation he had built them on. Julian was a demanding, often frustrating partner. He was impatient, blunt, and communicated in clipped, precise sentences. He trusted data, not emotion, and he pushed her relentlessly. Yet, there were moments. Late one night, as they were poring over a complex piece of code, he saw the exhaustion on her face. Without a word, he left and returned with 2 mugs of tea. He didn't say anything, just placed one in front of her and went back to work. The small, human gesture was so unexpected it almost made her cry. She began to see the man behind the myth. She saw his obsessive drive, but she also saw that it was aimed at creation, at pushing boundaries. He wasn't like Alistair, who sought only to acquire and possess. Julian wanted to build. In that, he was very much like her father. The alliance was working. Their legal team, armed with Clara's information, filed a blistering lawsuit that sent shockwaves through the industry. Kronos Innovations' stock plummeted. Alistair was trapped. But a cornered snake is at its most dangerous. The attack came without warning. Clara was leaving the Nexus Tower late one evening when a sleek black town car screeched to a halt beside her. The back door opened. "Get in, Miss Vance," a calm voice said. It was one of Alistair's lawyers from the restaurant. "Mr. Finch wishes to have a word. I strongly advise you not to make a scene." Her blood ran cold, but she knew running was pointless. She got in the car. They drove to a secluded mansion in the hills overlooking the bay. Alistair Finch was waiting for her on a terrace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked older, more strained, but his eyes held the same cold fire. "Clara Vance," he said, swirling the amber liquid. "You have your father's eyes, that same foolish, misplaced idealism. What do you want, Alistair? This crusade of yours, this alliance with Croft, it ends now," he said conversationally. "You are going to withdraw the lawsuit. You are going to sign over the patent to me for the modest sum of $1 million. And then you and your mother are going to disappear." Clara laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "You're insane." Alistair's smile vanished. "Let me be clearer." He nodded to his lawyer, who tapped on a tablet. A live video feed appeared on the screen. It was a view of a hospital room. Clara's mother was sleeping peacefully in her bed. "That is a live feed from a camera my people installed this afternoon," Alistair said softly. "The man sitting in the chair by her bed, the one dressed as an orderly, he works for me. All he has to do is switch the IV drip bags. It will be painless. It will look like a tragic, unfortunate complication. A heart attack, just like your father." The world tilted on its axis. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. The sheer, calculated evil of it was suffocating. "You have 24 hours to sign the papers," Alistair said, placing a document folder on the table. "If you tell Julian, if I even suspect you have told Julian, your mother will be dead before he can get to the hospital. Checkmate, little girl." Clara was driven back to her small apartment in a state of numb shock. She sat in the dark for hours, the folder on her lap. Alistair had found her one weakness. He had bypassed Julian's walls of money and power and put a knife directly to her mother's throat. She couldn't tell Julian. His response would be overwhelming force, a frontal assault. But Alistair's threat was silent. insidious. A switched IV bag. There would be no proof, no one to blame. Julian's power was useless here. She had to do this alone. She thought about her father's work, his notebooks. He wasn't just a programmer. He was a security expert. He was paranoid about people like Alistair. He had built back doors, kill switches, into all his early designs. He called it the Persephone Protocol, a fail-safe that could be triggered remotely, designed to render the entire system inert, a digital ghost. Alistair had stolen the Helios Protocol, but he had never understood its deepest secrets. Clara did. She wouldn't sign the papers, and she wouldn't let Alistair win. She was going to destroy her father's creation before she let it remain in the hands of the man who had murdered him for it. She pulled out her laptop. It would take all night, but she knew the entry points. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard. It was a desperate, suicidal move. Activating the protocol would erase the very thing she was fighting to reclaim. But it was better than letting it be a monument to Alistair's victory. As the sun began to rise, she found it. A single, elegant string of legacy code buried deep within Kronos' central server, her father's digital signature. She prepared the activation sequence. Her hand hovered over the Enter key. This was it. Justice, of a sort. Suddenly, her apartment door burst open. Julian Croft stood there, his face pale, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. He wasn't alone. A team of grim-faced security professionals swept into the room behind him. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous as he took in her screen. "Saving my mother," Clara choked out, tears finally streaming down her face. "He has someone in her room, Julian. He's going to kill her." Julian's eyes flickered from her face to the code on her screen. He understood instantly what she was about to do. He crossed the room in 2 strides and gently closed the laptop. "No," he said, his voice softer now. "We are." He knelt in front of her, taking her trembling hands in his. "You don't think I have my own people at that hospital? You don't think I put your mother under surveillance the moment we declared war on Alistair?" He pulled out his phone and pressed a button. "Status. Asset is secure," a voice crackled back. "Imposter orderly has been neutralized and is in our custody. Package is en route to an undisclosed location." Clara stared at him, bewildered. "Neutralized?" "Alistair's man has been persuaded to cooperate," Julian said, a grim set to his jaw. "Your mother is safe, Clara. She was never in danger. I was waiting for Alistair to make his move. I just didn't expect him to make it against you directly." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than a strategist in his eyes. She saw genuine fear. "He underestimated you, and I almost did too. You were going to sacrifice everything to stop him." "He threatened my mother," she whispered. "I know." His grip on her hands tightened. "And for that, I'm not just going to bankrupt him. I'm going to bury him." He stood up, pulling her to her feet. "Your father's kill switch. Can you trace its activation signal? Can you use it not just to shut him down, but to expose him?" A new idea, audacious and brilliant, sparked in Clara's mind. The protocol wasn't just a kill switch, it was also a beacon. If triggered, it was designed to copy the entire system's core data, every file, every transaction, every secret, to a secure off-site server her father had set up years ago. A data tomb. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with a newfound icy resolve. "I can." "Then let's go," Julian said, turning to his team. "It's time to hunt." The war room at Nexus Dynamics was a symphony of controlled chaos. Data streamed across a wall of screens as Julian's team prepared for the final assault. They had Alistair's thug, who had confessed everything, giving them the leverage they needed for a federal warrant. But a warrant took time. Alistair could erase his servers in seconds. The air in the war room was a low-frequency hum of high-stakes computation, a stark contrast to the frantic, silent ballet of fingers on keyboards. Julian Croft stood behind Clara, a sentinel carved from granite, his presence a palpable force field. He was not directing his team, he was observing hers. In the past few weeks, his elite hackers had come to treat Clara's intuition as a fundamental law of physics. She didn't just understand the system Alistair had stolen, she understood the mind of the man who had built it. "The breach is a pinprick, a microscopic tear in the fabric," whispered Leo, the team lead, his face illuminated by the cascade of green code on his monitor. "The moment we push anything through, their defense VIs will collapse on it. We can establish a single, unidirectional audio channel to the central server core. It will last for seconds, maybe a minute if we're lucky. You'll have one shot, Clara." Every head in the room turned. The weight of billions of dollars, of years of pain and suppressed rage, of a father's stolen legacy, settled onto Clara's shoulders. It was a crushing, impossible burden, yet it felt strangely like home. She had been carrying it her whole life. Julian's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, not a gesture of comfort, but of solidarity, a transfer of strength. "The floor is yours, Director Vance," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. The title was a quiet acknowledgement, a promise of what was to come. She nodded, stepping towards the broadcast microphone. The channel opened with a soft hiss of static, like a door to a forgotten tomb being cracked ajar. She took a breath, not of air, but of memory. She pictured her father's workshop, the scent of solder and ozone, the gentle scratch of his beard as he tucked her into bed. She wasn't a corporate raider. She was a daughter saying goodnight. Her voice, when it came, was not a command, but a lullaby. Clear, steady, and imbued with a love that transcended time and technology. "Tomorrow," she said, her words echoing into the digital heart of Kronos Innovations, "will be a better day." For 3 agonizing seconds, the data streams remained unchanged. A collective breath was held. Leo's fingers hovered over his keyboard, ready to sound the retreat. Then, on the central screen, a new line of code bloomed, written in an elegant, archaic script that was her father's digital fingerprint. Persephone Protocol, authentication. Accepted. Mirror sequence, initiated. A wave of relief washed through the room, immediately broken by a cacophony of alarms. The pinprick breach widened into a gaping wound, but from the other side, a digital immune system swarmed towards them. "He knows we're in!" Leo shouted, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Alistair's VIs are active. They've triggered a system-wide purge protocol. We have 90 seconds until total data annihilation." A timer materialized on the screen. 90 hours. Beside it, a transfer bar began to crawl forward. 1%. 2%. It was agonizingly slow. The defensive programs, visualized as jagged red shards, began hammering at the transfer stream, chipping away at its integrity. "The VIs are learning," a programmer yelled from across the room. "They're adapting to our intrusion methods. The transfer rate is dropping." The bar shuddered, its progress slowing. 15%. 16%. 16.5%. "It's not just a standard defense AI," Clara said, her eyes locked on the screen, seeing not just code, but a ghost. "It's a mimic. Alistair built it to emulate my father's predictive strategies. It's anticipating our moves because it's using his own logic against us." "How do we fight it?" Julian demanded, his gaze fixed on her. "We don't," she replied, a strange calm settling over her. "We let it win the battle it thinks it's fighting." She turned to Leo. Leo, isolate the VI's core heuristic engine. Give it a target, a big, juicy, fake one. Create a ghost directory, name it Project Chimera, and start feeding it corrupted data packets. Make it look like that's our primary target. Leo's eyes widened in understanding. A feint. You want to distract it. My father was a chess player, Clara said. He always believed in sacrificing a pawn to trap a queen. 60 seconds remaining. The transfer rate had stalled at 22%. The team worked with frantic precision, creating the digital Trojan horse. As they deployed it, the red shards on the screen swarmed the new directory, tearing into the corrupted data with ferocious intensity. The pressure on their main data stream lessened. The transfer bar jumped. 35%, 40%, 55%. It's working. But their relief was short-lived. A new alarm, higher and more piercing, shrieked through the room. "He's cutting the power!" an engineer cried out. "He's initiated a sequential shutdown of the server farm's physical power supply. He's pulling the plug." 30 seconds remaining. The transfer bar froze at 68%. The building's power grid was dying. "There's no override," Leo said, his face pale. "It's a hardware-level command. We've lost." Julian stepped forward, his expression colder and more dangerous than Clara had ever seen. He grabbed a secure hardline phone from the central console. "This is Croft. I need to speak to the chief grid controller for Pacific Metro. Authorization code, Omega-7 Alpha. Now." There was a pause. "Listen to me very carefully. I am invoking the National Security Infrastructure Act, citing imminent and catastrophic corporate sabotage. I need a Level 7 energy spike directed at Grid Sector 4, Substation Bravo. A directed surge. You have 5 seconds to comply before I hold you personally responsible for a $10 billion market destabilization." The lights in the war room flickered violently. Clara realized what he was doing. It wasn't just a power surge. It was a controlled lightning strike, a jolt so massive it would overwhelm the building's internal breakers. "The failsafe," she breathed, remembering a passage in her father's journals. He was paranoid about blackouts. He built a priority protocol. In the event of a critical power failure, the system is designed to dump all remaining capacitor energy into its last active process to complete the command before dying. 15 seconds remaining. On screen, the Chronos power indicators began to flash red and then go dark, one by one. But as they did, the last vestiges of the system's energy, its dying breath, were funneled into the single active process, their data transfer. The bar didn't just move, it screamed across the screen. 80%, 95%, 100%. Transfer complete. System offline. 1 second remaining. The connection went dead. The screens monitoring the Chronos network went black. A profound, echoing silence filled the room. For a moment, no one moved, caught in the vacuum left by the storm. Then, a single programmer started to clap, a slow, stunned rhythm that was quickly joined by others, growing into a wave of thunderous applause. Clara sagged against the console, the strength leaving her legs. It was over. The ghost was captured. Julian's hand was on her arm, his grip firm, steadying her. He didn't say a word, but his eyes, those intense grey storms, were filled with a raw, unguarded admiration that spoke more than any words could. The victory, however, was not clean. The days that followed were a descent into a new kind of chaos. The data they had exhumed was not a neatly labeled confession. It was a digital Pompeii, a decade of corporate life flash-frozen in terabytes of encrypted, fragmented code. Julian's teams worked around the clock, but every decrypted file seemed to open a Pandora's box of legal and ethical complexities. Alistair Finch, his assets frozen, and his reputation in tatters, was out on bail, a ghost haunting the city he once ruled. He was silent, which was more terrifying than any public threat. One evening, nearly a month after the raid, Clara stood in Julian's office, staring out at the city lights. The initial euphoria had faded, replaced by a gnawing unease. News reports were filled with stories of the impending collapse of Kronos, of thousands of employees facing unemployment. "We broke it," she said softly, her reflection a faint superimposition on the San Francisco skyline. "We won. But we broke everything he built." "He built it on a lie," Julian's voice came from behind her. He stood by his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand, another untouched on the desk for her. "A foundation of sand cannot support an empire. Its collapse was inevitable. You just chose the time." "It doesn't feel like a victory," she confessed, turning to face him. "It feels like demolition. All those people." "We will rebuild," he said, his certainty absolute. He gestured to a stack of files on his desk. "My M&A team is already structuring a plan. We're not going to let Kronos collapse. We're going to absorb it, rebrand it. We'll save the jobs we can, excise the rot Alistair created, and integrate the technology ethically. We won't just reclaim your father's work, Clara. We will redeem it." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the shift that had been occurring over the past weeks. The predator was still there, but his focus was no longer on the kill. It was on what came after. He was thinking like a builder. "Why?" she asked, the question hanging in the quiet space between them. "This is more than you needed to do. You could have just taken the patent and let the rest burn." He was silent for a long moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "When I was 22, he said, his voice lower, more reflective than she had ever heard it. "I started my first company with 2 partners. We were brilliant, and we were naive. Our lead investor, a man I trusted, used a capital call to dilute our shares to 0 and steal the company from under us. My partners gave up. I didn't. I spent the next 5 years destroying that man. I bought his competitors, poached his talent, and bankrupted him. It was a masterpiece of revenge." He finally met her gaze, and his own was bleak with memory. "And when it was done, I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. I learned then that destruction is empty. It's a void. For the last decade, I've been filling that void by acquiring, by conquering. But it was never enough." He took a step closer. "Then I met you. You had every reason to pursue the same empty revenge I did. You could have let me sign that deal and then destroyed me, and you would have been justified. But you didn't. You chose justice over vengeance. You reminded me that the goal isn't to burn down the old world, but to build a better one." He paused. "You are an anomaly, Clara Vance, a variable I can no longer compute, and for the first time in my life, I find I don't want to." The raw honesty of his confession left her breathless. This was the man behind the algorithms, the heart inside the machine. Before she could respond, his secure line buzzed. Evelyn's voice, crisp and urgent, filled the room. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a request for a meeting. It's from Alistair Finch." The final confrontation took place not in a boardroom or a courthouse, but in the hushed, sterile conference room of a neutral law firm. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and unspoken animosity. Alistair sat alone at one end of a long mahogany table. He looked diminished, the patrician confidence stripped away, leaving behind a brittle, haggard man. Yet his eyes, when they met Clara's, still held a flicker of the old venom. "No lawyers," Alistair said, his voice a dry rasp. "Just us. The principals." "We're here," Julian stated, his tone flat and non-negotiable. He sat beside Clara, his posture relaxed, but radiating a coiled intensity. "You have me checkmated, I admit," Alistair began, forcing a magnanimous smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The data you stole, it's damaging. But it's also complex. It will take years to litigate. Years of appeals, motions, injunctions. It will bleed you both dry. I, on the other hand, have resources. Funds you haven't found." He leaned forward, his gaze locking on Clara. "I am prepared to offer a settlement. A generous one. 20% of the company's value, transferred to Vance Innovations. A public statement acknowledging Marcus Vance's foundational contributions. In return, you drop the lawsuit and hand over the original patent." It was a masterful play, an appeal to reason, an attempt to turn her into an adversary of Julian. He was offering her a clean, profitable end to her crusade. "You're offering me a fraction of what you stole from my father, and you want me to call it justice?" Clara asked, her voice quiet, but vibrating with cold fury. "I'm offering you a future," Alistair snapped, his composure cracking. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're destroying a legacy, a global enterprise. For what? A ghost's honor?" "It wasn't just his honor you destroyed, was it, Alistair?" Clara said, her voice dropping lower. She pushed a single slim folder across the table. Julian had given it to her that morning. It was the final, most damning piece of the puzzle they had assembled from the data. Alistair looked at it, confused. He opened it. Inside was not a legal document, but a series of internal emails and accounting records, memos authorizing payments to discredited journalists, invoices for a black PR firm, a detailed, multi-year campaign of whispers and lies designed to systematically ruin Marcus Vance's professional reputation, to paint him as unstable and unreliable long before the final betrayal. And at the bottom, a final, damning piece of evidence, a cancelled check to a private investigator, dated the week before her father's heart attack, for 24/7 physical surveillance. "You didn't just steal his work," Clara said, her voice ablade. "You hunted him, you harassed him, you bled his spirit dry and pushed him into an early grave, and you documented every second of it. The lawsuit was never about the patent, Alistair. It was about this. It was always about this." Alistair stared at the papers, his face turning a waxy, bloodless white. This was the part of the data he must have forgotten, the petty, vicious details of his cruelty buried under years of corporate maneuvering. He looked up, his eyes wide with a dawning, animal terror. He wasn't just facing financial ruin and prison. He was facing the unassailable truth of what he was. A murderer in all but name. He looked from Clara's face, a mask of righteous judgment, to Julian's, a cold, unmoving promise of consequences. The fight drained out of him, leaving a hollow shell. The predator had finally been cornered, not by a bigger predator, but by the relentless, patient ghost of his own crimes. "You've won," he whispered, the words dissolving into the silent, conditioned air. It was the sound of a soul surrendering. 6 months later, Clara stood in the cavernous, dusty space of her father's old workshop. After the final settlement, a complete transfer of all Kronos assets to a new joint entity formed by Nexus and Vance Innovations, this was the first place she had reclaimed. The legal documents had called it a derelict storage property. To her, it was sacred ground. The air smelled of cold metal, old paper, and the faint, lingering scent of her father's pipe tobacco. She ran her hand over his primary workbench, the wood scarred with burns and gouges, each one a story. This was where the Helios Protocol had been born, not as a product, but as a dream sketched on a napkin. This was where her legacy began. The heavy sliding door rumbled open. casting a long rectangle of late-afternoon sun across the floor. Julian stood there, silhouetted against the light. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple black sweater and jeans. In his hands, he held not a tablet or a legal brief, but 2 steaming cardboard cups of coffee. He walked over, handing one to her. Their fingers brushed, a small spark of warmth in the cool, still air. For a few minutes, they stood in silence, simply sharing the space, the weight of their shared history settling comfortably between them. I always imagined this moment would feel louder, Clara said, her voice soft. Confetti, champagne, a press conference. Victory is rarely loud, Julian replied, his gaze sweeping over the old oscilloscopes and dormant machinery. More often, it's the sound of a door opening to a quiet room. He set his cup down on the bench and unrolled a large blueprint he'd been carrying under his arm. Clara looked at him, a question in her eyes. The grand gesture, the institute. But the drawings on the page were not of a gleaming, monolithic tower. It was a modest, intelligently designed floor plan for a small-scale facility. The Marcus Vance Initiative, the title block read. It's not a monument, Julian said, anticipating her thoughts. It's a workshop, an incubator, a non-profit funded by our new joint venture. We find brilliant young engineers, the kind of people your father was, and we give them what he never had: resources, mentorship, and an ironclad legal framework to protect their intellectual property. We don't take equity. We just give them a safe place to build. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. It was perfect. It wasn't a monument to the dead. It was a promise to the living, a legacy that breathed. I spent my life building an empire of ones and zeros, Julian said, turning to her, his guard completely down. The grey eyes were clear, vulnerable. You showed me that the only code that matters is the one that connects us. It's illogical, inefficient, and prone to error, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. He reached out, not to take her hand, but to gently wipe a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I'm not an easy man, Clara. I'm difficult and demanding, and part of me will probably always trust an algorithm more than a feeling. She smiled through her tears, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. And I'm a waitress who started a war with a billionaire. I think we're both anomalies. He smiled back, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his face. So, Director Vance, he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur as he gestured to the blueprint spread between them. Where do we begin? Clara looked from the blueprint to her father's workbench, to the face of the man who had seen her when she was invisible. The ghost had found her voice. The Emperor had found his heart. The past had been honored. The future was a clean sheet of paper, waiting to be written. Here, she said, placing her hand firmly on the blueprint next to his. We begin here, together.